In 1979, the world was introduced to the menacing glare of the Ayatollah Khomeini. His Iranian revolution ousted the Shah of Iran, a U.S. ally, and put its mark on American history with a hostage crisis that lasted more than a year. Its leaders began to purge the country of Western influence and set Iran on a path of expansion and Islamist terror. During the revolution, the U.S. was dubbed the Great Satan by the ruling mullahs. Still, most of their hatred was reserved for the country they called the Little Satan, Israel. For 4 decades, they have vowed to wipe it off the map. The show of force continued this month as Iran paraded its missiles in Tehran.
I think a clash is inevitable.
Middle East expert Michael Widlansky says according to Israeli military sources, Iran has armed Hezbollah in Lebanon with enough missiles to bombard all of Israel for weeks.
Lebanon itself is so well armed with Hezbollah missiles and rockets that Israel could face every day not 10 rockets, not 100 rockets, but 2,500 rocket attacks every day over a period of 3 weeks.
And that doesn't take into account Iran's nuclear program. In last year's UN address, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu exposed a secret nuclear site with 300 tons of nuclear material. While Widlansky warns Israel can take care of itself, he worries if the mullahs aren't stopped, their grand design could swallow up the region.
The Iranians want Shia Islam to be the face of Islam. That means they want to go after Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait. They want to go after all their neighbors and project their force all the way to the Mediterranean and to the Atlantic. This is not just a religious calling. This is very serious power politics strategy playing.
John Waggy, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Joining us now is Jonathan Schanzer. He's the Senior Vice President of the Foundation for Defensive Democracy. He's an expert on the policies of the Middle East. And Jonathan, welcome. Glad to see you.
Thank you very much.
What is Iran trying to do?
Well, Iran's got a couple of different objectives here in the Middle East. Right. One is to kick the United States out, and it's for that reason that they were laying mines and attacking American soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's a big part of what they're trying to do. They also have the goal of destroying Israel, which we just heard about. They have roughly 150,000 rockets. They've been digging tunnels under the ground through Lebanon and working with Hezbollah to achieve those aims. And then there's the broader aim also of hegemony across the Middle East. Shia Islam is roughly 20% of the faith, but they would like to be the dominant force in the Middle East. So they're trying to stretch their power from Iran all the way through Iraq and Syria to the Mediterranean.
Is there a possibility of a preemptive strike from Israel against them? I mean, sooner or later, you know, they can't be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. What's Israel going to do?
Well, Israel continues to strike tactically at Iran's weapons in places like Syria. They've actually struck Iranian assets more than 200 times over the last year or so, and that's pretty impressive. There's the broader question that you raise of the nuclear program. Of course, we know that the Israelis went into Tehran and stole thousands and thousands of documents from a warehouse, exposing a lot of Iran's nuclear secrets. But I think the Israelis have been reticent to launch a broader war now. That doesn't mean they won't have to do it at some point if they see the imperative.
How about the nuclear threat? Is Iran close to getting a bomb, do you think?
Well, the documents are interesting, the documents that the Israelis stole. What it actually shows is that the Iranians did put a pause on their nuclear program, but that they were a lot closer to getting those nukes than people realized before that deal was signed in 2015. The problem is that if we allow Iran to keep going at its current pace, they could probably develop a nuclear weapon and the means to deliver those weapons in roughly a year or two. And that is not something that the Israelis are willing to countenance.
Well, I understand the vice president was in Europe trying to get some European allies to come with us against Iran, and he wasn't successful. The Europeans like to trade with the Iranians.
Well, the Europeans were part of that P5+1 process that led to the 2015 nuclear deal. They saw it as a massive achievement, and they want to try to preserve it. I think because probably they're afraid of Iran. They're afraid of what Iran could do in Europe. So they're going to continue to try to trade. They actually have something called a special purpose vehicle to help evade U.S. sanctions, which we find to be incredibly unhelpful, as we all know. But really, I think the question is, can we bring the Europeans closer to us in terms of a longer-term deal with the Iranians, something that deals with the question of terrorism, that deals with the question of cyber activity, human rights violations, and of course, nuclear. Right now, we're very far apart. The hope is that we can bridge that gap. Warsaw was a first step.
We're in touch with a lot of the Iranian people, and they don't like the mullahs. They don't like that theocracy that controls their country, and they want to be free. What can be done to, to encourage those people?
Well, we had a moment in 2009. It was called the Green Revolution, where hundreds of thousands of Iranians came out into the streets. This was the best opportunity that I have seen to challenge the Iranian regime, and it was remarkable. The Obama administration elected to not take advantage of this, to not encourage these people, and in the end, the regime cracked down on the protesters. We saw murders and rapes in the streets, people being beaten up, people still in jail from 10 years ago. So the hope is that somehow the Iranian people begin to feel emboldened again, but they need to know that the United States is on their side. And I think that up until recently, they didn't really believe that was so.
Well, Jonathan, thank you very much. And do you think, they've got missiles capable of hitting not only Israel, but all of Europe. If they have any kind of nuclear bomb, they can threaten the capitals of Europe. So it's an existential threat for everybody, right?
It sure is. And when we think about what we're doing right now, we just had a long campaign against the Islamic State. And I think we're now looking at a shift toward the Islamic Republic, that this was the country we should have been thinking about all along the way.
Sure.